Hi, this is Ed from the Dad Who Codes. So in our previous video, we looked at how we could get, save, and remove to-do list items from local storage. But our problem was we could only save and get one to-do list item. So in this video, we're going to fix this by allowing the application to save and retrieve many to-do list items. So let me just tidy up my code a little bit. So previously, we were saving our to-dos as a string value and assigning it to a specific key using the setItem function from local storage. So let's have a pause for a moment and think about what we want our application to do right now. So we can create one or many to-dos, and we can also complete and delete them as necessary. What we really need to do is to be able to save all our to-do list items that we have that we can see at a moment in time. And this is where the Save Data button comes into play, calling the Save To Do function that we created earlier. So now we need this method, Save To Do, to save all the to-do list items on the screen. Since all the items are here on the screen, let's inspect the HTML element for it. If we recall, a UL element holds each LI element, and each LI element is our to-do list item. We need the text value from this to-do list item, and this is within each of the input elements of each LI element. Note that each of these input elements has a class, to-do class. So if we had a way to tell our application, hey, get me every element that has a class name, to-do class, and then return to me the input element from those, and following that, the value from those elements. Then we could get all the to-do list text right here, right now, at this moment of time in this application. And there is a way to do this using the method called document.getSelectorAll. So what is this query-selector-all method? Well, this will return something called a node list. And a node list is a collection of nodes. Nodes can also be element nodes. So we can refer to node lists in our case as a collection of HTML elements. You can pass a class name as an argument to this query-selector-all method. This will search your application for all elements that match this particular class name that you pass, and then it will return the elements as a collection. It should also be noted that this node list that is returned can be looped over like an array. To loop over an array, we'll be using a for loop. So what is a for loop? A for loop is a way for us to iterate over an array a certain amount of times. On each loop, we can perform some code to run. The for loop could look like this. So let's explain it a bit more. The for keyword tells our application that we are calling a for loop. Within the brackets, there are three parts to this code: the initializing step, the conditional check, and the incrementing step. These are separated using semicolons. Remember, we are iterating and running the code an X amount of times. So the first part is initializing the starting value. I'm using a variable called I and setting this to 0. So 0 is my starting value for this for loop. We then have a conditional check. This part of the code essentially says, hey, should we keep looping? And here what I have is, I check if I is less than a length, for example, the length of an array. And then if it is, I say, yes, keep looping. Otherwise, we're going to stop the loop and break out of it. The final part of this refers to what happens to the variable I every time we decide to continue looping. In my case, we're going to increment I by 1 using I++. This ensures that we will eventually end this loop and we're not going to keep running this loop till infinity. You will also notice some squiggly brackets, and for each loop, we're going to be running some code within these squiggly brackets. So let's return to our application. Let's reset all the to-dos from our screen, and we're going to start with some new to-dos. I'm going to create them quickly right now. In our script.js file, within the save to do function, I'm going to completely rewrite the code here. So to start, let's create an array that's going to be storing all our to-do list items at our current moment in time. And I'm going to call this array to-do array. Next, we need to get all the to-do list items, and we're going to be using the query selector all method to do that, and then we're going to pass that to a variable. I'm going to call this variable to-do list query, and then I'm going to set this equals to document.getSelectAll and open some brackets. And to get the to-do list items, we need to pass in an argument, which is going to be .todo class. Note, we do need to put in the dot here just to signify that this is a class name. Then we need to iterate over this to-do list query node list that I've just created. Remember, the query selector all returns a node list, but this node list can be used like an array. So we're going to be looping through this node list to pull those text values. To start our for loop, type in for, then open brackets and set an initializer, and I'm just going to put var I equals 0 semicolon. The semicolons helps us separate these three steps within the for loop. Next, we're going to create a conditional check. We want to make sure that we loop through our node list based on the amount of elements that are within it. So as long as our variable I is less than the length of the node list, we keep looping. So the code that we write is I is less than to-do list query dot length. This bit of code dot length returns the size of our node list, and you can use this with an array as well. Finally, in order to keep looping until we need to stop, we need to increment I by 1, and therefore at one point the value of I is going to be greater than the length of the node list, and at that point we're going to break out the loop. Now close up the brackets and open some squiggly brackets, and we're going to be writing some code here. And this code will run every time we loop. So remember the array that we created earlier, to do array? So our plan now is that every time we loop, we're going to be getting the to-do list text value from our node list, to-do list query, and then we want to push that value into our array. In order to push that value into an array, all we need to do is, and I'm going to write in the code, to do array dot push, and then open some brackets. Within these brackets, we're going to put in the value that we want to push into the array to do array. Now, here's a quick quiz for you. See if you can get the to-do list text value that we want from that to-do list query variable that we have. To help you out, try and console log out the contents of to-do list query, something like this, and then view that contents in the console log, and then experiment how you're going to get that value from there and put it into our array. So pause this video now and give it a try, and then I'll show you how I would do it. Alright, so to get each to-do list item, we can utilize our variable I that's from our for loop. And so on every loop, so for the first time, I is going to be 0. So we're starting at 0. And then we're going to get the value from the to-do list query by using the dot value code. So I would write within those brackets, to-do list query, open square brackets, I, close square brackets. So I'm getting the 0 element, dot value. And as you will see in the for loop, I will keep incrementing each time. So on the first time, it's going to be 0. Then on the second time, it's going to be 1, and so on and so forth, depending on the size of this to-do list query. So let's console log out the to-do array and see what our application returns when we try to save data. We can see in our console that it returns an array with our to-do list items as strings. Now with this array, we're going to set it to local storage. From now on, there is only one key we'll be using in our application, and I'm going to call this key to-do list data. This key will return a value, and that value will always be all the to-dos that we will save to the application. So now we call local storage dot set item, open brackets, quotation marks, to-do list data, close quotation marks, comma, and then we're going to pass in the array that we want to set as the value for this key, to do array, close the brackets, semicolon. Now before we reload the application, I'm going to put at the top of the script.js file this bit of code, just to console log out what we have saved for the to-do list data in local storage. So now when our application reloads, we will see in the console what data is stored in there. So now with our to-dos in place, let's hit the Save Data button, then reload our application. And we can see now that the value for the key to-do list data in local storage only returns a string separated by commas. And this is because data that gets saved into local storage is always saved as strings, even if we pass in an array. But for now, we have a string of to-dos saving to local storage caused by the function save-to-do. So we do have a record of them. And essentially, we need to use this save-to-do function within our complete and delete functions as well, because we need to update our application with the to-dos in the system. So let's modify, first of all, the onComplete function. I'm going to add save-to-do right at the end here. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing with the onDelete function as well. So in our next video, we're just going to be tidying up a few more parts of our application to get things working further. So I hope to see you then. Take care and all the best.